Come to the show. We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we can talk about. Come to the show. We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we can talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we can talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we can talk about.
You are now tuned in to the Chop Shop with your host, Pastor Marvin McKenstry Jr. Let's chop it up.
Good evening, my friends, my family, my fellow Baltimoreans. I'm excited as always that God gives us the privilege to bring you the Chop Shop tonight. And tonight is going to be fire because we have one of our regular contributors, a brother who, when it comes down to what's happening in Baltimore from an advocacy perspective, has a great handle on the political scene, the one and only director of policy from the Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, Mr. Dayvon Love is with us tonight. But before we get to that, y'all know we open this thing up by reporting the good news, and I'm so excited, first of all, to bring on the screen my right hand and my left hand, my main man, Mr. Shaka, our producer on the ones and twos, Techniques 1200s, because anything else is undignified. What's up, Shaq?
How you doing, sir?
Man, listen, I'm on fire, man. I'm not going to tell you no lie. This past weekend, we got down in my beloved Lexington Terrace community, and we brought the community out, man. It looked like an African village down there, man. We did it all in the street. On that photo is my brothers, and we call ourselves the Lexington Terrace 9. These brothers put their time, energy, effort, and funds in to make sure that we would have a successful community day. We didn't even call it a back-to-school drive because book bags was just one element of it. It was a community day that was centered in unity. This was what it looked like. You got myself, you got one of the LT9, Makiba Hart, a friend who grew up in the neighborhood in the middle in the blue, who was from Healthcare Access Maryland. Dynamic Healthcare Services, a mental health organization. Last year was a vendor at our event. This year came in as a partner and contributed financially to making sure we could do it bigger and better than ever. And that amazing young lady in the pink who literally became the primary organizer. Y'all know I lost my sweetheart, my grandma. I was moving in slow motion. Keisha stepped in, picked up, and we had an amazing, amazing community day. We gave out over 500 book bags. We fed the community. We bought a grocery truck. You name it.
That's crazy.
God blessed us to be able to do it, man. And I'm telling you, we
crazy.
had the entirety of the 800 block of Lexington Street, vendors on both sides, and we brought people out from everywhere. The street was crowded like back in the day.
Hold up. Is that a Dookie O's rope he got on, man?
Hey, that's my man. Listen, we call him Hollywood, man. If anybody can pull it out, it's that brother right there, man. Good brother, man. I'm just so excited about what God has done. We were able to not only have our community unity day, but to celebrate 15 months murder-free in our community, man, where they were dropping every 2-3 months. I'm just excited about it, man. They ain't talking about it in the news, but literally was at a meeting today, and I know we on pace to eclipse where we were last year, but in the Western District, where God is blessing me to do a lot of work, murders are down 33%, and non-fatal shootings are down 23%. Now, we don't want to see anybody get hurt or injured, but, man, this thing is really starting to catch on, man. And in my neighborhood specifically, no murders for 15 months, man.
That's dope.
I'm on fire about it, man. I'm
That's
on fire.
Dope,
and with that being said, man, we're going to get to these church announcements.
That's real dope, man.
We're going to get to these church announcements. Y'all know we always kick it off the same way. We kick it off with the Stop the Beef hotline. Listen, there's some things that are at work right now in Baltimore City, and it's actually working. And one of them is the Stop the Beef hotline. The brothers from the We Are Us men's movement had this hotline in place. If you or somebody you know is involved in a beef situation that can lead to somebody's harm, we need you to get on the phone to 443-431-3705 or 443-522-7848. When you make that call, we're going to make sure that there's a man on the other end of the line that's receiving that call, and we're going to move accordingly in any way that we need to make sure that that situation is resolved. We pay debts off. We put people on planes, trains, and all kind of automobiles to get them out of harm's way. And We are working with some relocation services. So if somebody needs this with completely no police involvement, hit up the Men of the We Are Us movement and we will make it happen. Walking hand in hand with the Stop the Beef hotline is the Baltimore Peace Agreement. Y'all heard it. We got together with people that are behind the walls, people who used to be in the streets, people who are still active in the streets, and we came up with a 10-point plan that's designed to give people an alternative to the violence, where we say, even if you got to eat in the streets or feed your family in the streets until we can give you something better, you don't have to die or kill in the streets. These brothers have made a declaration to live, and as it's walked the community, we are still seeing those who have made this declaration stick to their word. So if the peace agreement has not made its rounds to your community, reach out to Men of the We Are Us men's movement, and we will come your way and get this Baltimore peace agreement to the people. Sunday worship service. We are at 1063 West Fayette Street. We ain't claiming to have a monopoly on God or on the Christ, but what we want you to do is come through because we are a loving people. Worship, family, community, healing, and unity are our focuses as a people. Join us at Victory House Worship Center, where I, yours truly, have the privilege of being the senior pastor, the lead servant, at 10 a.m. on Sundays, and we're going to have a good time in the Lord. The Employ Baltimore show is coming to you every Thursday at 1 p.m. I have not made an appearance in a while because I'm on another assignment that is of great importance, but it's still coming on, produced by the fabulous Miss Katanya Lester, and featuring various personalities from the Mayor's Office of Employment Development and the Baltimore's Youth Opportunity Program. And listen, they're no different than me. You get on there, you're going to get real-time employment information because we are the plug. Make sure you tune in. All right, estate planning and wills. Listen, y'all, one thing that I will tell you, in the course of the last 3 years, both of my grandparents went home to be with the Lord, but there was not one concern financially in those processes because my grandparents had pre-arrangements. They did what was necessary to make sure that no burden other than healing from the transition that they made was on us. Listen, make sure that you take care of this and don't take it lightly. We have traditionally not made sure that we have done this. So this is for Baltimore County. We're going to get some resources for Baltimore City too. This is for Baltimore County. We want you to reach out to 410-877-6680 or spits@registers.maryland.gov. For more information, you can go to www.registers.maryland.gov to make sure that you have your stuff in order. No fighting amongst the family, none of that, because if you pre-plan it, everybody has to understand it, and nobody's got to try to fight for what they believe you were supposed to get. So make sure that the estate planning and wills is a part of what you do. All right. Thank you, Mr. Pitts. We have run through the church announcements, y'all, and it is time. We cannot leave this out. The victorious one himself, my brother, man. I love this man of God. Him and his wife are great people who are about a great work in the city of Baltimore and in their ministry in the Park Heights community out in Baltimore County. Just doing great things, and they're going to have a month of celebration. It's going to be kicked off with Pastor Tyrone Nance, and he's going to be followed up by Bishop Allen Porter from North Carolina, and it's going to be closed out by two of my favorite guys, Bishop Jonathan Wallace, right here, one of Baltimore's own from Manor Nations, and the great Dr. Walter Scott Thomas of the New Psalmist Baptist Church. Listen, if you want to have a good time in the Lord, come on through and celebrate with our great family members. That's who they are to us, and they're awesome people in God that are about a great work and doing great things to further the kingdom agenda of God and love on his people. Pastor Andre Nance, continue to stand strong, brother. We're excited about what God is doing in your life. All right. It's time to get to what we came here to do. Listen, y'all, I need y'all to get these numbers up. I need y'all to make sure right now that you like and love and share and tag people in the comments so that they know that we're here. We're pretty consistent with coming, but somebody might be trying to eat their dinner like I was right before it was time for us to go on the air. But we don't want anybody to miss this conversation. This conversation is going to be thought-provoking, and it's going to challenge the status quo. We are here tonight to talk about the Democratic stronghold on a city like Baltimore, on a state like Maryland, where while black people specifically continue to vote Democrat faithfully, continue to push the Democratic agenda in the electorate faithfully, we're not particularly seeing the return on our investment. And in order to have this and any conversation on the Chop Shop, we try to bring the most credible voices. This young man wrote a piece. Hey, Shaka, is there any way that we can get that heading up there so I can read the quote from the piece before we bring our brother on? If it's too late to ask for that, because I want people to really, really understand what perspective we coming for. I can read it right here off my phone. And it reads, the core of the party, which is dominated by an overwhelmingly white donor class made up of white corporate and political elites and a multicultural gatekeeper class, has benefited more from black people's consistent patronage than black people have benefited from Democratic Party representation. This quote comes from the one and only director of policy, a man who gets it done not only in the streets, where he's very present, he also gets it done down in the State House as it pertains to legislation, a constant contributor on the nationally syndicated well, not syndicated anymore, but the internet show Roland Martin. We're talking about the one and only Mr. Dayvon Love. Dayvon, thank you for gracing us again, man, with your wisdom.
Hey, appreciate for you you having me on, bro. Good to see you.
Man, and look, it's always our pleasure, man, because these are kinds of things that have gotten me in trouble for saying them for quite some time now.
Yeah.
I'll go into the room, and because objectivity has really become the perspective that I take towards these things, because I have not seen us grab a hold of the prize, even through 8 years of a black president, man. I'm really over the idea of identity politics, voting a color, partisanship, or any of that stuff, because I want to see real change. And when I read this piece, I shot you a text, was like, bro, please tell me you're free and we can come on and sit down and have this conversation, because it's important that we have people understand that while we've been under Democratic leadership in this city, delivering on the promises that are made during election time has not come specifically to the black community. First thing I want to ask you is, what in your heart, because I've heard you have these conversations, but what in your heart is pushing you to make this now a way more public perspective?
So a few things. One is I wrote the piece in the context of the coming general election that we got, the gubernatorial election. And, you know, when we think about like what it means for black people to be engaged in politics, I think too often it's reduced to, you know, voting for the lesser of two evils. And what that does for black people is that puts us in this perpetual position of ceding over a bunch of power that we could wield more effectively if we were more intentional about how we position ourselves and participate in the overall political process. And, you know, I remember, you know, you mentioned Roland Martin in the intro. You know, him and I had a big argument during the 2020 election on his show, because he kept chastising people who chose not to participate in the electoral process as, like, you know, stupid, just being real demeaning. And my point to him was that the people who are often the most visible proponents of engaging the electoral process tend to be the vote blue no matter who people, and many of them in many respects are the crooks, right, that are taking advantage of how black folks have ceded so much power to a party that doesn't feel the obligation to deliver to us, because we're not levying the kind of consequences against those who represent us electorally in the way that would make them behave differently. And so I want to, and in the light of the gubernatorial election, we're going to be asked, you know, we can't have Dan Cox win. You know, if he wins, that's going to be the end of the world. And I understand the importance of Cox, you know, losing. Like, it's important. right? Because I also seen the piece of the Republican Party is bad for Black folks as well, right? So it's not about being a Republican or anything like that. But we have to use this moment to demand that the Democratic Party come closer in the direction of Black people, like working class Black people that traditionally aren't involved. We need to demand that they come closer to us and not allow them to use the fear tactics of not wanting Dan Cox to get elected as the basis for, again, us ceding power that we could use to benefit our community.
When we talk about the upcoming gubernatorial election, what do you think it's going to take to really be effective in that messaging as it pertains to not particularly leading anybody away from Westmore or whatever the case may be? What does it look like to really have that level of accountability? Like, Wes, the Black community is poised and prepared to come out for you, brother, but you got to deliver.
So that's the hard thing about a lot of this, right? Like, so much of this is first of all, our community, in terms of us being intentional, and we've talked about this before, like a lot more political education about just how stuff works, right? And the reason I say that, to preface the answer to your question, is because a part of us being able to effectively demand things from elected officials is knowing what is in their power to deliver on and knowing the mechanisms for which they can deliver on that. So I'll give you an example. One of the things, Maryland has one of the most executive heavy systems of governance in the country, right? The governor makes the budget, right? And so a big part of the budget is the capital budget, right? So that's the budget where all buildings that are built by the state, that's what that budget is. And so, there are lots of people who, particularly lobbyists or people who are savvy with advocacy, who will make it a point to go to the governor and try to get in the capital budget. So a part of the civic engagement part, like if the Democratic Party was serious about empowering Black people, there would be the political education available to tell the community, hey, think about capital projects that would be useful for your community, right? So that we can go to the governor and make sure that those things are in the capital budget, right? And so when I criticize the Democratic Party, a part of it is that if they were serious about empowering our community, those are the kinds of things that we would hear more about, right? Because those are the kind of things that I think would drive people to the polls. So I'm saying this in terms of going back to your question. That's why I focus not so much individually on Westmore, right? But on the party infrastructure, right? That is the basis for him running in the general, right? Because the party as an institution will have the largest influence over how he governs. And so what I would say, part of the conversation I want to have with Wes, and that I think Black people should be having is, what are the levels of access that you're going to provide people on the ground, people who typically don't have that level of access, and provide the opportunity for our community to make those kind of demands. I use the capital budget piece as what is the access that folks in the community are going to be able to have to meaningfully be able to make those kinds of demands, right? And that's the place where he could start. And I think that's a place where he would be able to get some support from Black people that would be meaningful.
One of the things you highlighted in your piece was the fact that there's a multiracial or a multicultural system of gatekeepers. When you start talking about the Democratic Party and the strength that they have here, will the access be granted to West to have these conversations prior to the upcoming election?
One of the things that some of the old heads have said to me about Wes, and again, this isn't per se a judgment, but an observation, is that when you think about the kinds of Black people that are able to ascend to the highest levels of institutional power, excuse me, they tend not to be like your grassroots, revolutionary, in your face, like that tends not to be the folks that get to the highest level. So when I talk about that multiracial gatekeeper class, we have to observe, well, who are the Black people that typically are allowed to get to that level, to be able to engage in that level of decision making? And I think if we observe it closely, we observe the kinds of folks that are able to essentially speak on behalf of our community in those contexts. And what we have gotten in the past historically is folks that are able to benefit themselves more than the masses of the Black people in our communities. And so that multiracial gatekeeper class is something that is really important to call out. Again, because it is in the names of the masses of Black people that those folks that are in that gatekeeper class are able to essentially peddle as their stepping stone to those positions of power. So the other thing I would say about that too is that, and this is going back to the piece, the idea around who ascends to the top. I think that when we think about like what it means to build power and what it means for our community to have power, I think we have to stop thinking, and I mentioned this earlier, we have to stop thinking about power in terms of individual people. We have to start thinking about power in terms of institutional formations, ecosystems of institutions that play a variety of roles to be able to accomplish a set of agenda items. And that's important. So I ran for state central committee, Democratic Party state central committee. I'm a registered Democrat in the state of Maryland. Do I feel like I have an allegiance to the Democratic Party? I don't, right? I think that I'm as I mentioned in the piece, Black folks are part of a captured electorate. Like our vote isn't able to really impact the electoral outcomes in the city unless you're a Democrat. And so in return for that being a captured electorate, I ran for state central committee because I want to push the Democratic Party in the direction of our community, right? So, but that's thinking institutionally, right? That's thinking about the larger institution of the Democratic Party and how we can put pressure on it. And so the last thing I'll say about that, in terms of the institutional formation, the Democratic Party needs to invest in that machinery. And I think one of the places the Democratic Party has been the most derelict in their responsibility to our community is that if they were serious about empowering Black people, there should be Black-led civic institutions whose job it is to go out and build the infrastructure that would represent Black people that would be able to be independent, but be able to interact with the Democratic Party. We would see more voter registration drives, more political education, more investment in institutes where folks are able to come and get the civic education they need. Like if the Democratic Party was serious, those kind of investments would come for us to exercise more power. And so I think as a community, we got to start demanding that of them.
So for the Democratic Party, when you look at it, it appears that they have the perfect storm. You know, the ultra moderate Larry Hogan can't run for re-election. You have what appears to some to be a candidate who has all of the stamps of the evil empire on him with his Donald Trump endorsement. And then you have the opportunity to elect at the highest level in the state, the first Black governor. Is the party sleep in what appears to be a perfect storm for their win, or is there just an outright ignoring of the constituents that causes the lack of those education campaigns and institutional access ideologies being the battle cry of the party?
So that's yet to be seen. So that's part of the thing I also say in the piece as well, is that Westmore and the Democratic Party, I think, have two major potential roads in front of them. One road is we want to beat Cox, and so we want to lean into the moderate Democrats, what I call Hogan Democrats, right? Those centrist Democrats that represent more of like the wider rural parts of Maryland that tend to be conservative and tend to have many anti-Black notions about Black folks, which impacts the kind of policies they're looking for. You know, harsher mandatory minimums, less interest in investing in Black-led entities and enterprise, right? So he could go in the direction of trying to appease that base, and that would be going away from our community, right? Or Westmore's campaign and the party can decide we're going to take this opportunity and really lean in to the community in ways that typically the party doesn't. That we're going to try to go after and address the issues of Black people that traditionally feel marginalized and not really addressed in terms of their concerns by the party. That we're going to invest in that as the basis for getting an electorate out, or getting folks out to be able to vote and bring Black folks, particularly working class Black folks and other peoples of color, poor people in general, into the process. So those are the two roads that the party and the campaign could take. And my concern is that many of the folks that are in that donor class, gatekeeper class, might see that first route as the safer route. And they may try to hold us hostage and say, well, no, we just got to get them elected, right? Because we can't risk getting Cox elected. And again, what I would say to that is that's the constant thing we're told every election. We're told in every election, yeah, we got to try to go to the moderates. We got to try to go to the people who might be scared if we have an agenda that's really bold for the community. So we're going to try to moderate. And a part of me, reason why I wrote the piece is because I really want to encourage the Democrats and the campaign to come towards us. Like that needs to be because the long-term benefits are bringing more of us into the electoral process in a way where we can actually have policy that delivers for our concerns. That's going to have a longer-term impact. But what that would do is that would give Black people the kind of power in the party that a lot of the gatekeepers don't want, right? So that's really the essential issue that's at hand, again, which is why I wrote the piece.
When Larry Hogan beat Anthony Brown, I was surprised. He was the lieutenant governor of an incumbent governor who had pretty much not the greatest approval rating when he left office, but Anthony Brown had a lot of strength in PG County, which is one of the largest parts of the state. When Larry Hogan beat Ben Jealous, I wasn't surprised. I didn't really feel as though the Democratic Party had the kind of strength they needed to conquer what Larry Hogan had become. And now we find ourselves where Larry Hogan can't vote. What is the current state of the state level Democratic Party? Because I think that there are many people here, specifically in Baltimore, who see this election from a Baltimore perspective where Democrats will just walk through, not realizing that this state is way more than the city of Baltimore.
Yeah, I think there's some people that will probably be dismissive of Dan Cox's candidacy, particularly given Hogan has publicly said that he's not going to vote for Daniel Cox. And so I imagine that there are a lot of moderates who will say they won't as well. But, I think this is the first time in like this modern political era where the state of Maryland has to seriously deal with a Trump-backed candidate at that level. And we don't know the extent to which there is support around the state for that. Like we actually don't know. And so I think as a result of not knowing, I think what it also says to your question in terms of the state of the Democratic Party is in an interesting position. When I look at, for instance, the legislature, the Democratic Party is certainly moving more to its left, right? Which is a good thing. And it's been forced in that direction. So I want to be clear. It's not like something, kind of altruistically they decided. They were pushed in that direction by, organizations like mine and many others. So that's a good thing. The concern, though, and I think the dilemma before the Democratic Party is that because what you also have is you have a lot of moderates, both Democrats and Republicans, who are complaining. They describe the Democrats in Annapolis as too far left wing, right? In fact, there was this guy, I forget his name, wrote a piece. He didn't say names really, but basically said that Annapolis Democrats have allowed advocates to just prance around the hallways like they own the place, right? And change the culture of Annapolis. That's basically them saying that they're losing power, right? Like a lot of that corporate donor class that I'm describing, many of those folks are losing power in ways that they certainly don't appreciate. And so what it says about the state of Democratic Party is, again, they got to make a choice, right? Because as we're pushing them further to the left, they're going to be forces that want them to come further back to the center, right? And what the gubernatorial election does is that it forces the Democrats to have to look in the mirror and say to themselves, are they going to, out of convenience and out of what I think is a short-sighted strategic approach, are they going to try to appease people who are complaining that things are moving too far to the left, right? I give you one other example. I wrote a piece that appeared in the Afro a few days ago that talks about the work we're doing on reparations on the war on drugs. So one of the things that we were actually able to pass last session, we actually talked about this on your show last year or early this year, was that the 30%, at least 30% of the tax revenues are coming back to the community. Each jurisdiction has to pass a law to determine how those monies are allocated. So we're going to work on that version for the Baltimore City Council. And there was a conservative gentleman who wrote an article basically in response to what I wrote. And basically he used the fact that we were able to get that passed as a reason to sound the alarm on the Democrats going too far, right? So again, so the Democrats have to decide, like, are they going to stand on, you know, the direction that they're claiming that we're going, or are they going to capitulate to people like that? They're going to say stuff like, yeah, reparations for the war on drugs, that's too radical, right? And I think the Democrats, that's the state they're in. They got to decide whether they're going to be bullied into going back to the center, or whether they're going to keep moving in a direction that I think is in the interest of our community.
So that's a perfect segue. We got a clip. Last week we had a friend of mine who is a Dan Cox supporter. He's a registered independent, which we know November, everybody can come out and vote, right? He's a registered independent. But the terms that he seems to be leaning on, and the campaign seems to be leaning on, is conservatism and things like constitutionalism. I want to play this clip. I want to get your feedback. And then I want to have a conversation around how these classes are emerging that doesn't represent partisanship, but in a lot of cases, they're getting to conservative values, they're getting to constitutionalism, and a whole lot of morality, and how much of that speaks to voters who may be traditionally Democrat. Can we run the clip for me, Shaka?
The Republican Party is not to the right of center anymore. I tell people I'm a centralist. And what does that mean? The center of political life in America, outside of anything, is the Constitution, period. If you're progressive, then you're going to warp the Constitution this way. And if you're Republican, in theory, you do it to the right. The reality is the Republicans, as a minority party, have chased the Democrats, right and left, so far that both parties are to the left now. Conservatives still right to the right. So
Dayvon, what's your feedback just on that perspective? And then I want to deal with those terms, conservatism, constitutionalist, and pretty much those who are voting more from a moral perspective with some of the things that we've seen recently happen in the Supreme Court, and how you think that may impact this election.
Yeah, no, that's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to start with John Henry Clark quote that I use a lot, where he says that the left and the right has us wrong. And I think when we talk about the right wing and its policies to decimate our community, or the left that has attempted to exploit and profiteer off of our suffering, I think both of those wings have been detrimental to our community. And I've been very vocal in criticizing the progressive left. I don't know that there's an organization that's been more critical of the progressive left than LBS has, even though in terms of many of the policies that we pursue, like we pursue a lot of the criminal justice reform stuff that we know is good, redistributing the wealth, into our community, fighting for more access to resources for Black grassroots organizations. So in many respects, while our policy platform most aligns with progressives, there's certainly elements of the progressive left that are a problem. And one of the biggest parts of the problems with the progressive left is that a lot of the times when the policies they pursue, they undermine the importance of Black people's ownership, sovereignty, self-determination as central to the effort for advancing our community. A lot of times progressives see Black people primarily as recipients of services, as opposed to a sovereign people that just needs the right investment and infrastructure for us to be able to meet our own needs as a community, right? And so on that front, in terms of criticizing progressives, I think there's a bunch to criticize. And again, LBS has been very consistent about that. But I don't think that then becomes a good rationale for not recognizing the danger of the far right wing. Because we got to remember, so let's take someone like Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, former advisor to Donald Trump, and I would argue in many respects one of the intellectual architects of the movement that emerged that Trump leads, right? But that preceded Trump. You know, Sarah Palin, Tea Party, all that, right? So Steve Bannon is one of those intellectual architects of that. And one of Steve Bannon's central perspectives is around this notion he calls economic nationalism, right? Centered around the American citizen as the primary unit of politics, and that American citizen, an economic opportunity for the American citizen. What that wing is interested in when they say the American citizen, they're not actually talking about Black people, right? They're talking about white folks that have access to resources, to have access to institutions that allow them to maintain a societally and culturally superior position, right? In the society that we're in. I say all that because when you look at Dan Cox, you look at the positions that he's taken, and you look at the positions that the Republicans have taken in general. Larry Hogan vetoed a bill years ago that would have given formerly incarcerated folks who are on parole who have felonies the right to vote. He vetoed that, right? He vetoed things like parole for people that have spent long time in prison, who the parole commission says should come out, right? You know, they vetoed a bill that would have provided more resources to community-based anti-violence programs, right? So we got to be real specific about who we're talking about. And Dan Cox is a part of a party and the platform and positions that he has taken that are harmful to our community, right? And so the guy who you had the clip, I just feel like he was talking really too much in abstractions. We got to look at like what specifically are we talking about in terms of policy, and on the questions of policy, Dan Cox is a danger to Black people, right? And again, this is coming from a person who clearly doesn't have like an allegiance to the left or right. You get what I'm saying? But we just got to be clear about what we're talking about. And there's no world where the Republican Party in Maryland can claim that they've done significantly more for Black people on policy than the Democrats have. That's just not a viable argument.
So I had the privilege of speaking to not only our guest last week, but somebody that's associated with the Cox campaign. And one of the things that seems to be a central theme is the vote for morality. And one thing that I'm clear on is that the first Trump election, I know a lot of Black people that voted for Donald Trump because of two major things: his moral stances on things like gay marriage and things of that nature, and where he stood on economics. So I know that there are a lot of voters, Black voters in the state of Maryland, that really vote values, morality, and those kinds of things. Are people overlooking that group of people as the Cox campaign seems to want to lean more towards Roe v. Wade and things of those kinds of, is that being overlooked? Where does that group of people fall? Because to me, those become the sleeping giants when you're talking about trying to win a state like Maryland.
So I think what you've raised are the conversations that we got to have with our community about the particulars of what it is they're supporting, right? And what I mean by that is that because I think you're right, there are people for whom the question of values and economics, like that's a place where they are. Let's start with the economic question. On the economic question, and we're basically talking about less regulations, lower taxes, right?
Right.
Now, one of the things
that's one of the interesting things to me. Conversations around economics don't normally include Black community needs.
Right. And I think, and so that's the thing. So there's an organization, the Maryland Center for Economic Policy, right? And they've done some really extensive research on Maryland's tax code. Even though Maryland as one of the highest tax rates in the country, right? That it is the middle income earners that contribute, and lower income earners that contribute a larger percentage of their income to taxes than the wealthiest people in the state, right? I say that because the folks who are talking of, who would be interested in lower regulations and lower taxes, it's a complicated issue because we're in a context where even though we're taxed high, we're not getting the services. We're not getting the resource for the services, right, that those taxes demand. So we should have a tax structure where folks on the lower income and middle income side are paying less taxes, and that the people at the highest 10% are paying a lion's share of taxes, right? And so the people that you're talking about who are saying like they would vote on the economic question, to me, that's a discussion to have with them to say, yeah, I get what you're saying. You paying a lot of taxes, but the solution isn't to lower tax. The Republican argument is cut corporate taxes. And you cut corporate taxes, that means services that go to poor and working class Black people, there becomes less access to those resources for that. You know what I mean?
Is the Democratic Party going to have this conversation and educate that group of people? I think that Maryland specifically as a state is kind of, even beyond the color lines, divided because we have such a large concentration of Hispanic people and all of that. And I'm not even talking just Baltimore. You go to places like Montgomery County, you really see just how big a population that demographic is. Is normally looked at, to me, it goes outside of the framework of Black and white because it becomes more about where you are in the sense of the economic class, because you got poor of all colors.
Right. And a part of what Larry Hogan was actually very good at is talking to Black small business owners. Normally, Republicans only talk to each other. They only talk to other white folks, right? And what Larry Hogan did very effectively was targeted, and with Boyd Rutherford, targeted, small Black entrepreneurs, business owners, for whom their policies would benefit them more. And to your point, the Democrats don't do a good enough job of talking to that constituency. Because if they were talking to that constituency, now here's the other part of it, though. It's not just that they're not talking to them. The policy that I'm describing, the core of the Democratic Party doesn't want to do that, right? Because we're going back to that donor class that wants to maintain power. They don't want to pay more taxes. They'd rather the middle and lower income for folks in Maryland pay more tax. They're not going to say that, right? They're not going to put that on the table. And this is a place where, Black people using our leverage to demand of the Democratic Party, we're going to have to push the party to do that, right? And so this is one of those instances where the Democrats claim to be for the working class, right? But then it should be easy to say tax the top 10% income earners, because that's not going to be Black people, right? That's mostly going to be white folks that's in that top 10%. And then those small, entrepreneurs that you're talking about who are going to vote on economics, the policy I'm describing would help them without sacrificing the services. On your question about morals, I think that's another piece that, an analogous situation is the cannabis stuff. And again, we talked about this before. Like, I had a conversation with a faith-based organization. I'd asked them to support the work that we did on cannabis, and they were hesitant. When I explained to them, though, that the cannabis legalization is inevitable. And so it's really a question about making sure we get our return on investment of all the damage that's done to our community. Folks pretty easily change. Similarly, on things like abortion, it's not a question of whether or not you support actual people, people getting abortion. It's a question of, if folks are going to do it, right, we want to make sure that folks can be safe. And part of the challenge is that if you have folks that are going to have to resort to unhealthy means, right, to me, that's the argument, right? It's not a question. It's similar to like gay marriage. It's like, you don't have to marry somebody of the same sex if you don't want to. You know what I'm saying? But people
How
who
effective? How effective do you think that is when you talk? Because everybody knows I'm a pastor, right? And I'm very, very private about my political views around certain things, except if you ask me and in certain settings, right? How effective do you think that has been where you have people, because it's got to put you ultimately in a compromising situation if you're standing and you're preaching morality, right? am I then going to let Dayvon Love and LBS come into my church and educate people around voting and have the conversation that you're having now? I'm not talking about me specifically, but how effectively, what level of access have you been given in faith-based institutions to educate voters around these moral questions? Because again, to me, I believe that's what they're sleeping on.
Yeah, I mean, the only context that I can speak authoritatively to is the cannabis question, because I worked on it, and it's an issue that does, raise some of the morality piece that you described. I think it's just a question of respecting people's opinions and talking to people from the perspective of, I'm not trying to make you believe something.
Have you been given access to faith-based organizations to have these conversations?
On cannabis, I have.
Okay.
On cannabis, we've been able to have those conversations. We had participated in an event at a church several months ago, prior to the work we did in Annapolis. Like I said, the faith-based organization was actually a coalition of churches around the state, Bridge, Maryland. So they invited me to come and talk to their board, of all faith leaders. So on the cannabis question, and so a part of why I'm saying I can speak authoritatively on that is to say, if you're a person who you love Black people, you spend time around Black people of all different perspectives, then I think there's ability to do so. I do think, though, that the Democratic Party and many of those who are advocating positions that deal in the issues you're describing, I don't think they do a good enough job of being really intentional about talking to that constituency you're describing that has those reservations. And when they do, and now this is just my observation, when they do, I think it happens in a way that isn't considerate of the fact that some people just aren't going to change their mind, and that's okay. But being able to talk to people from the vantage point of, well, here is how it can help the community from a larger perspective, as opposed to trying to make people change their moral, religious beliefs.
You're on Live with the Chop Shop. I have not done a break or announcement. We come to you every Thursday at 6 p.m. via Facebook and YouTube. Y'all, listen, these are conversations that people need to have. This election, I personally believe, is going to shock a lot of people because we have to have a more educated electorate in order to make this happen. If you want to support the channel, you can go to Cashapp, $thechopshopbmore, $thechopshopbmore. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. And please, all the money that you send in donation goes back into the show and to support the effort of trying to educate our community. Dayvon, man, it's never enough time when I talk to you. We ain't at that end point yet. We got a little bit more we can get in, because I do believe the state of Maryland right now, because I'm a person that literally likes to go digging, I've done some research. And when you look at going all the way back to the last time Ehrlich was able to win an election, O'Malley, Larry Hogan's first victory, his second victory, Maryland is a very peculiar voting state at the state level. Do you feel as though, from the access that you have at the state level, the party is doing enough to really push for Westmore to be elected, or are they taking this too lightly and thinking that they got an easy path to the governor's mansion?
So I think if you ask people who are working on a campaign or very proximate to it, they'll tell you that they're working, every day, right? That they're on.
No, not his campaign, the party.
Right. No, I'm gonna get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, if you talk to them, they'll say he's working every day. When I look around at the places that I occupy, the other kind of political spaces, when I talk to people who are very involved in civic life and advocacy, I don't know that I see it translated. I don't know that I see, and then even outside of that, like just in general life, I don't know that I see it.
Well, somebody said to me that he only needed Baltimore for the primary.
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore's Baltimore's a given for the general. Is he only needed the campaign in Baltimore for the primary? Give me your feedback. I'm gonna put it out there today. So these are conversations I'm having. That the brother only needed Baltimore for the primary. don't expect to see him work in Baltimore too hard because he's got to go other places to win.
Yeah, that's. I mean, see, that's a strategic mistake that I just think has become Democratic Party orthodoxy. There's a sister who's a very good friend of mine. Her name is Jessica Bird. She runs a all Black woman team, 3-point strategies around electing Black women around the country. I met her in 2016, and she gave a presentation on just the electoral process. And one of the things that she documents in this presentation is the amount of potential Democratic voters versus the ones that are actually registered. And from her presentation, when you looked at states all around the country, there were more potential Democrats that were unregistered, like in some cases 2 or 3 times more than were actual registered Democrats. And that what the party typically does is they focus on those registered Democrats and ignore everybody else. And so for me, Baltimore is one of those places. I think last time we get like 15, 16% turnout.
That's what I'm talking about. First of all, there's an apathy to the midterm election. Then there's the idea that, you know, it's a given in Baltimore. And to me, these are strategic mistakes that if you were to isolate any of these particular elections, I would isolate the first Hogan win as one where these mistakes cost the party greatly. And it seems like banking on the idea that this guy's endorsed by Trump and some of the other stuff, because to me, the Kavanaugh win is a big deal.
And I think I think that's the piece that goes back to the initial piece I wrote, which is like, come to the community, build with the community, get those people that tend not to participate, bring people in. It's going to require delivering on policy. It's going to require advocating for things that typically the Democratic Party has been shy about or been timid or tepid about. But yeah, I mean, if they're telling you that they're not going to worry about Baltimore City, that already speaks to my concern as to what the kind of energy the campaign is going to put into it. So, you know, I just hope there are other people in the campaign who recognize how much of a mistake that is, and just recognize not for the election itself, but for post the election, right? Like the importance of really going deep into the community and really going out and getting people that traditionally don't come out. I just think that's going to be real essential.
Well, let me be clear. That didn't come from somebody in the Moore campaign. It came from a local elder. As I was gaining some perspective on the election in November and talking about, because this is the last thing I'm going to say because we got to really get to our close. There have been people who have come out publicly pro Westmore that are people who are in position to move constituencies and institutions in one direction or the other. Do you think it's too early to do that? Should this be happening after debates and things of that nature, or after the opportunity to be able to sit down and have those intimate conversations to ensure that your endorsement is going to be delivered on? You're going to get those promises delivered on?
I mean, I think people. I'm trying to get a meeting with Westmore. I saw him briefly at a conference a couple of weeks ago. Had a short conversation. I think everybody who has a constituency or a particular body of work for our community should be, you know, trying to talk to the campaign, to get a conversation with him and his people, and to press them to make certain kinds of concessions. And I think that people need to enter those conversations with a conditional promise of support on him publicly declaring that he's going to move in the direction that those of us that do the work on the ground want him to go. Like, we just have to demand that as a condition and not take it as a given, because as we know, you know, elected officials, we got to have something to hold them accountable to, or they'll find excuses why they can't do it. So yeah, I think people should be reaching out now. People need to be pressing the Moore campaign now.
Give us your closing comments back to our original conversation piece, not yielding our support to the Democratic Party short of getting a return on our investment.
So I'm going to tell a brief story. I was invited to participate in a webinar that was hosted by a friend of mine who is in elected office. It was a virtual event held by the Democratic Party State Central Committee, and it was to talk about voter participation and engagement. I was one of 3 panelists, and in that, a lot of the stuff that I said today are things that I said on that panel. And there was a Democratic Party operative who complained about what I had to say on that panel. And he complained so much that the video was deleted, right? So the recording of the video was deleted of the thing. And as I was saying what I was saying on the panel, the other panelists agreed, the people in the conversation with me agreed about the importance of Black people needing to have civic institutions that can hold the Democratic Party accountable, do the kind of voter education so that we can make the Democratic Party actually deliver on policy in ways that it has not. It was deleted. And so I mentioned earlier, like running for State Central Committee, because for me, it's important that if Black people are the captured electorate that I described, then we have an obligation, a responsibility to make the party deliver for our community, because it has created a closed primary system such that the vote, at least on the local level, doesn't even matter if you're not a Democrat. And so we have an obligation, a responsibility to make the Democratic Party deliver on policy. We shouldn't have to be shy about it, right? We shouldn't have to be apologetic about it. We shouldn't be accused of being right wingers because we want the Democratic Party to actually live up to what it says it is. And we also need to make sure that we're educated in the levels of power so that we can more effectively demand the kinds of things that we need from the Democratic Party. And so that is something that I think should be on our minds as we think about the 2022 election and beyond.
Real, we want to thank you again for being with us. Real good wisdom and commentary. You might be here monthly until the election happens and beyond. I just love that you bring such foundational wisdom to this. We had some other things that we said we want to come back and talk about. We still got to have a squeegee conversation and a few other things. But man, this was hot button when I saw it, and I appreciate you coming and opening up your perspectives to us. I believe you had one of the greatest political advocacy minds. I actually made a statement earlier this week because Baltimore has a history, and I've been around the Baltimore electorate since I was a kid. I had a godfather who was one of the greatest advocates this city has ever seen, but could never get elected. And that has been the history. I don't know any true advocate that's in City Hall. I mean, somebody who we know, except maybe Odette Ramos, because she has kind of that history of advocacy in her community and she won her district. I don't know another that has that. I could be wrong. I'm not saying I know it all, but we have a history in Baltimore of the great advocates for Baltimore and beyond not being able to win elected office. I thank you, man. You have one of the most brilliant minds and one of the most greatly articulated minds that I've ever sat down and talked with in my life, and I really appreciate you being here. I want to thank Shaka, our producer. Man, you always making the magic happen. We nothing but great things, man. I don't want to ever do this show without you. He shouted out his mom. Hey, mom, she can hear me because she in the other room, but he ain't gonna outdo me on here. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank you, our listening audience. I always say if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Of course it does. It just was nobody there. You guys show up and you show out because we're going to continue to bring you quality content on the Chop Shop. Always trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways. He will direct your path. Be the change that you need to see. Love where you are enough to make things better. And always above and beyond anything else, remember that we can be more. See you next week.